Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Syntax Party. We are so happy you've joined us. We're so glad to spend the morning with you, and we're looking forward to a great morning of really digging into some syntax and grammar learning together. So I'll just start by acknowledging that Dyslexia Canada and IDA Ontario serve individuals on the traditional territories of all the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across Canada. And we recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connections to our country. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, share, and live. And we gratefully acknowledge that funding, if you're new to an ONlit event, we gratefully acknowledge that funding for ONlit is provided by the Ontario Ministry of Education. And please note that the views expressed are the views of ONlit and do not necessarily reflect those of the Ministry of Education. So I did just want to briefly start by offering a very quick welcome. My name's Una from IDA Ontario. I'm joined with Alicia and MJ and Sandra from Dyslexia Canada. And I know we've got a wonderful group of educators joining us this morning. I know we've got some board groups. Welcome to London District Catholic. Welcome to Peterborough, Victoria, Northumberland, Clarington Catholic. I know we've got some school groups joining us. We've got Perth Avenue in Toronto, Elkhorn Public School in Toronto, Lloyd King Elementary School, located on the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And welcome to the Central teams who are joining us today as well. I know we've got Central team members from Simcoe County, from Blue Water, and consultants from York Catholic. If you're here, feel free to pop in the chat where you're joining us from. We're just so glad you've joined us today. In terms of our agenda, we will be, I will finish up and mute and pass it over to Margie very soon. We will be running a break at 10:30, just so you can plan your morning, and we will be all wrapped up by noon. Just in terms of housekeeping, as you are digging into the workshop, feel free to use the Q&A, excuse me, feel free to use the Q&A function within your Zoom toolbar. That way we'll be able to see your questions and we can pass those on to Margie and it won't get lost within the chat. I did mention prizes, and you know that at ONlit, IDA, and Dyslexia Canada, we do love prizes. So 5 participants who are joining us in Zoom will win a copy of the book that Dr. Gillis co-authored with Nancy Eberhardt, Syntax Knowledge to Practice. I have this book. I think it is wonderful. It has really supported my own learning in this space. So 5 lucky participants will get a copy of that book. And then if you are joining us and if you are posting on social, please use the hashtag Syntax Party, and we will draw one participant who uses that hashtag to win a copy of IDA Ontario's Basics of Decoding and Spelling online course. So feel free to be chatting away on social media. And with that, I will pass this over pretty soon to our wonderful, we're so thankful that Dr. Gillis is joining us today. Just so you know who you'll be learning with this morning, Margie is a wonderful expert and we're so thankful she's with us today. She is the founder of Literacy How and is also a certified academic language therapist. She is a research affiliate at Haskins Laboratories and sits on the editorial board member for IDA's Perspectives on Language and Literacy publication and also the Reading League Journal. So we are so thankful she's joined us today. And with that, Margie, I will stop sharing and I will pass it over to you. There we go. You should be all set. And please enjoy.
Thank you, Una. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Alicia, and all of you who have organized this webinar. I'm very happy to be with you today. And I thank you for taking time. I know how busy you all are as teachers, and I'm just grateful that you're all with me today. I don't know if you want to launch the polls right now. We do have a couple of polls just to see who you are, where you're from, a couple other quick questions. So there we go. So the first question, what is your role? And I'm so excited. I know it says 247 participants. I understand that there are probably more of you because Some of you are together in a room, some of you in a large room. So I'm so grateful that you all are taking the time to learn about syntax. I have a lot of classroom teachers, quite a few resource teachers, special education teachers. I have a few administrators. I always love having school administrators join because you all are the decision makers. So it's important that you have knowledge as well. Board administrators, and thank you for joining today. The second question has to do with the grade levels that you teach. So thank you for responding to that question. I have a lot of elementary teachers. Most number is grade 2, but I see I have teachers all the way up through grade 9, which is wonderful, wonderful. So I'm going to try to make this relevant for all the grade levels that are here this morning. The third question, how knowledgeable are you about syntax and grammar? So thank you for answering that question. And these last two questions we'll ask again at the end to see if I helped build your knowledge this morning. And the last question, which is the most important of all, how prepared do you feel to teach syntax and grammar? So that's another question that we'll pose at the end to see if I hit the mark. So a lot of you feel somewhat prepared, which is wonderful. A number don't feel prepared. That's why you're here today. And a few of you are all set. For those of you who are all set, I'd love to have you chime in. So I am still learning every day. I learn more and more. So I think that's the common thread with educators. We know that we never have all the knowledge we need. And that's why we do professional development whenever we can. So I hope this is worth your while. All right, I'm going to end the poll because I got great responses, which is terrific. And I'm going to stop sharing that. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you can't see my screen, there are my grandchildren. I wasn't intending for you to see them, but they are an important part of my life. So, but if you can't see my screen or you can't hear my videos, please let me know because I can't see anyone. And that always makes it challenging. I have to visualize a room filled with teachers because that's what I really do a lot. And I love having the teachers and the teacher feedback, but I know you're there. So we're having a syntax party. And why a syntax party? Because you really have to understand sentences to be good at comprehending text and writing text. So my background is in special education. Very quickly, I worked with kids for 25 years in resource rooms and around the country, and I learned a lot about teaching kids who struggle. And after doing that for 25 years, I took that hat off partially, never fully, and I started to work with teachers. And I went to Haskins Laboratories in 2000, and I was hired to take the research into teachers' classrooms. I did that at Haskins, which is a research lab in New Haven, affiliated with Yale. Learned so much about what teachers really need in terms of support, not just in terms of knowledge, but what they need in terms of how do you teach all the complexity of reading and writing. So I did that for 9 years, and then I left Haskins because the research funding dried up, and I started Literacy How. Literacy How is a nonprofit organization. We do a lot of our work in Connecticut, but I'm blessed to be able to do some of this work in other states as well. We empower teachers with knowledge because we believe that it is the teacher that teaches the child. Programs matter, materials matter, resource, all of that matters, but the teacher is the key variable. So we really pride ourselves and our team, all of us, in helping support teachers in doing their good work. I have 10 mentors who go into classrooms every day. We work pre-K all the way up through high school. We're working in tech high schools now, which is great, very needed. And we work with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and special education. Today, I'm going to do 3 things throughout the morning. I'm going to share research on the role syntactic knowledge and awareness play in a lot of things: reading, fluency, comprehension, and writing. And in this part of the webinar, I'm going to really focus on what is syntax and why teach it. Won't take too long because that's the theory, but everyone, I think, benefits from understanding some theory. And then we're going to jump into this big idea of what is a function-based approach to syntax instruction. So how do we teach it for reading comprehension and written expression? And that's really going to be the lion's share of the morning, talking about that. At the end, I want to talk about analyzing your text. And I did ask you to BYOB. So I hope everyone has a text with them today. It could be a read aloud if you're a 1st or 2nd grade teacher, 3rd grade teacher. If you teach middle school up through the middle and high school grades, I wanted you to bring a text that you might ask your students to read and write about. So have that text handy because we're going to jump into that very soon. At the very end, I'll talk briefly about syntax assessment. How do we assess students' syntactic awareness? If you can, grab a blank piece of paper. You're not going to turn this in, so just any piece of paper will do. I want you to make 3 columns on that paper. So just draw 3 vertical lines, and I'm going to time you. Let me turn on my timer, and I'm going to ask you to, hold on one second. I'm going to ask you to list as many animals as you can in the first column. Ready? Go. All right, stop. Now in the second column, I want you to list things, actions, and verbs that animals can do. So any verb, any action, and it does not have to go with the first column. So just a random list of things animals do. Ready, set, go. And stop. All right. In the last column, I want you to write a 2-word sentence that uses an animal from column 1 and an action from column 2. So any animal, any action that might go together, just 2 words. If you have to put an or a the in there, that's fine too. But basically a 2-word sentence, what we call a kernel sentence. Ready, set, go. And stop. All right. So we're going to come back to this. And this is called a sentence slam. Charlie Haynes and his co-author Terrell Jennings wrote a phenomenal book called From Talking to Writing: Strategies for Supporting Narrative and Expository Writing. It's one of my favorites. And Charlie Haynes is a wonderful human being, an amazing researcher, very practical too, and has devoted his career to teaching kids who struggle with writing to write. His methodology complements the writing revolution, which I know you all use. And this is something you could do with your kids. But I'm using it as a little warm up, and we're going to come back to this in a bit. So just keep that handy. So my first order of business today is to talk about what is syntax and why teach it. And of course, everybody knows the rope, I'm sure. But what would a webinar on reading and writing be without a picture of the rope? So we have the simple view depicted with this rope, although that wasn't Hollis Scarborough's intention, but we see word recognition, or the D part of the simple view at the bottom. The top, we see the LC, or the language comprehension. And this is where we're going to focus our attention today, on these language structures here, where we see syntax and semantics in the same strand, because they really go together. You can't really talk about one without the other, although we're going to focus specifically on syntax today. And if you haven't seen this, this slide before, something like it, we could think about students that have good language comprehension, but weak decoding, right? And these students are students that are often considered dyslexic. We have sort of the opposite profile, where kids have weak language comprehension, but good decoding. And these are students that might be considered having developmental language disability or disorder. They can read those words beautifully, but they have trouble with language comprehension. And then we have kids that are weak in both areas. And we have to really think about these three profiles. Fourth profile, we don't have to think about too much, because those students are good to go in both domains. But we want to think about these profiles because it speaks to the importance of differentiated instruction. And one size can't fit all. We can't give everybody that struggles the same thing. So the students with phonologically based reading difficulties, i.e. those students that are identified with dyslexia, are going to work specifically on word recognition skills. Students with language comprehension reading difficulties are going to focus on oral language and vocabulary. And those students who have difficulties with both need all of it. This comes from Louise Spear-Swirling's The Power of RTI and Reading Profiles. I also like to show this slide because it really speaks to the importance of differentiation, differentiated instruction, and shows us here systematically designed and data informed. But it's going to look different, right? That instruction is going to look different depending on which of these bands of students that we're talking about. The students in the bottom two bands really need a comprehensive analytical approach to learning language structure, what we might call structured literacy. The students in the top band don't need as much of that. They might need it for spelling and writing, which I always talk about. Actually, they all benefit from explicit instruction in spelling and writing. But these students in the top two bands seem to have much better, much higher and more proficient reading, certainly reading in general. And so if we go back to this idea of students that have word recognition difficulties, the Reading League published their defining guide a couple of years ago and gave examples of instructional practices that are aligned with the science. And certainly we know these students need to read connected text to build automaticity, fluency, and comprehension. And in here, by the way, is syntax, sentence comprehension, which we'll talk a lot about today. We do not emphasize speed or words per minute, right? And I will also go back to that idea. We don't want to do that. That's a practice not supported by evidence. Now, if we think about the students that need more of the language comprehension focus, some examples of practices that are aligned are explicit instruction in grammatical structures and academic vocabulary within the context of other reading activities, right? And not supported are implicit instruction of grammatical structures. These students with language comprehension difficulties will not figure out syntax unless they have explicit instruction that we're going to talk about today. I always like to also share our reading wheel, because the reading wheel is really our graphic organizer, if you will, to show all of the domains of reading that were identified initially by the National Reading Panel in 2000, with the addition of spelling here, with the addition of morphology here, with the addition of written expression here, with this at the center. And I will talk more about that because it's very important when we're talking about building language comprehension skills. But what you'll notice is our original wheel had fluency here, and that's because we wanted to represent the 5 pillars from the National Reading Panel. But to that earlier point, we saw a lot of teachers getting kids to read fast, and they were losing sight of what was the really most important thing about having kids read fluently. It's to comprehend the text, not to read fast. It's not a race. Kids who have slow processing speed are not going to be able to read fast. And it's okay. It doesn't matter as long as they're making meaning. So we replaced fluency with syntax. And you'll sort of see, I hope, why we did that and what we feel we get out of replacing syntax, because we're going to still talk about fluency, and you're going to hear me talk about it a lot today. Fluency is absolutely critically important, but we don't think of it the same way as some of these other big ideas. Reading fluency, or fluency of anything, is really about automaticity. So it's not like phonemic awareness or phonics. It's not conceptually the same thing. This is a QR code, by the way, if you want to just go to our website, and it will take you there. And there's lots more information about all of this. The National Center on Improving Literacy has great infographics. If you don't know about this wonderful resource, check it out. There's terrific stuff on it. And especially if you want to talk to a parent or a teacher who's learning the science of reading, there's some great infographics that really make this information digestible. I like this one on fluency, talking about the fact that oral reading fluency does include these 3 parts. And this mention of prosody, the skill of reading aloud with proper intonation, phrasing, and expression, is something I'm going to keep coming back today, because it really does teach us about how important syntax is in building fluency and supporting students' comprehension. Stevens, Walker, and Vaughn in 2017 published a meta-analysis of sorts, synthesizing the research on interventions for students with learning disabilities that are really needed for building reading fluency. And the implications for practice at the end of the article was just basically confirming repeated reading is the most effective intervention for improving reading fluency. But teacher modeling is a very important part of that. So kids who have difficulty with reading fluency have to hear a teacher modeling what it means to read fluently. The prosody, the intonation, all of that is part of it. And if you don't have enough teachers to go around, you have wonderful peers who are at the top of that ladder, right? Who read beautifully, prosodically, fluently, and they can be the role models for the children and the students who need more of that instruction. Also, the students benefit from what we call multi-componential interventions. That means that we're combining repeated reading with vocabulary instruction and comprehension instruction. So we're not doing reading fluency just sort of as a drill and kill kind of phenomenon. We're always going to bring in vocabulary and comprehension. This is a visual that we kind of adapted to put syntax and grammar in the place of what used to be reading fluency here. So syntax and grammar are, in our estimation, the bridge between word reading fluency, reading words accurately and automatically, and text comprehension. Again, because we can work on that prosody element of fluency. So what is the role of syntax in reading? Proficient comprehension of text is influenced by adequate syntactic knowledge. And I'm going to define what I mean by that. What is syntactic knowledge? This research goes back to 2007, 2009, and way before that too. However, explicit teaching of higher level components of literacy, such as syntax or text composition, may receive little attention. And that was written in an IDA brief a few years ago that really explains how and talks about the fact that syntax is not taught very much. Why not? I maintain that part of it is because teachers don't have the confidence to teach it. They may not know syntax well themselves, and so therefore they aren't confident teaching it to their students. I also want, as I'm talking about sort of what is syntax and where does it fit into the big picture, this is a graphic organizer that IDA recently published. If you haven't seen their 75th edition, anniversary edition of Perspectives, you can go on their website. Even if you're not a member, you can look at it. It's a fantastic issue devoted to structured literacy in all aspects. So I'll just talk you through this very quickly. At the bottom of this graphic organizer, you see the why the science of reading informing structured literacy. You see the what. These are this is the content associated with structured literacy, and you can see sentence structure, grammar, right here. This is the how and the who. Who students, which students, what instructors need to know structured literacy? And the answer is they all do. So if we look at the content, we see sentence structure and grammar are over here in the language comprehension domain. So syntax is really how words are ordered in sentences, right? How sentences are constructed with words. And the grammar is really, what are those words? What are those parts of speech? And I'll elaborate on that more. But if we think about the elements of structured literacy, we see here that there is this emphasis on the structure of language, and we have the elements, we have phonology, we have the writing system or its orthography, the structure of sentences, what we call syntax, the meaningful parts of words, what we refer to as morphology, relationships among words, semantics, and the organization of spoken and written discourse. So structured literacy teaches all of this. And it's really important to emphasize that because many people who are maybe anti-science of reading, one of the things they often say is, well, you just care about phonics. You're only teaching kids to read words and decode. And that is not true at all. If you really believe that structured literacy is an approach that is most effective and will work for all students, you see all the elements of language are here. So these language structures that I will, again, keep coming back to. And remember, Hollis Scarborough's rope, at the top of the rope, has a strand that says syntax and semantics. So you can't separate the two. But I'm going to talk through each of these structures because I do want you to sort of think about this big picture. Language structure, syntax and semantics. We're going to talk about sentence structure. And we're going to talk about these three types of sentences. We also have to talk about punctuation. When we talk about syntax, we talk about the use of and the relationship between the words, the phrases, and the clauses in sentences, and that is where semantics comes in. We also talk about coherence. We're going to talk about meaning links, cohesive ties, because those cohesive ties build coherence within the sentences themselves and then from sentence to sentence. And that's where meaning comes in. We also want to think about the way words refer to objects and concepts and how the way words and their reference can be understood in context. So we often talk about pronoun reference that can be challenging for our students, especially our students who are multilingual learners. The structure of sentences is something Nancy Hennessy has written extensively about. She wrote a phenomenal book called The Comprehension Blueprint. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But I love this quote that the reader has to figure out the logical relationships between words to construct meaning. And those relationships are conveyed through sentences. Now, I want you to think about this. So some sentences are tricky. These are adult examples. You would not give these to your students, but I'm going to give them to you today. I want you to circle or just visually, right? Circle. You're not going to circle right now because you don't have anything to circle, but pretend or put your finger on the screen and circle the subject and underline the predicate in this sentence. Okay. So anybody want to tell me? I see, I'm looking at the chat. Anybody want to tell me what the subject of this sentence is? All right, Lindsay. Yay. Ding, 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 ding. The young. What's the predicate? Man. Excellent. Man. So most people, most teachers, when I show them this, say there is no subject because they're looking at young man. They're looking at man as the subject and young as an adjective, and there's no verb, there's no action word. But that is hard, Stephanie. Yes, it's hard. This is just an example. Tricky. Yeah, you're right, Erin. Very tricky. And I wasn't doing it to be tricky necessarily, but I am saying that some sentences are tricky. Here's another one that may be a little tricky. I want you to find the subject and the predicate in this one. Somebody tell me what the subject is. Good, Kate. It's cotton. And a lot of you said clothing, and that's what most people say because they're thinking cotton clothing. What's the verb? What's the action word? Good, Amanda. Grows. So cotton grows. Now, if I had put a comma here and another comma here, you wouldn't have had a problem with that. But sometimes punctuation is missing from sentences. And so we have to just be really alert and thinking about what would make our sentences and our text hard for kids. I imagine that you all have seen and heard about, or at least many of you, but the 4-part processing model. If you haven't, it's a really important model to show that when we read, we are simultaneously activating the phonological processor, which are the sounds, the orthographic processor, which are the letters, the semantic processor, which is the meaning, and the context processor, or you could think about it as being syntactic processor, which is the sentence, right? So if you hear bow or bow, right? If you hear bow, you're going to do B-O-W. If you hear bow, you're going to do B-O-W. You have to know the context. Even if I say bow, you don't know if it's bow to take a bow or the bow of a ship, right? You need the whole sentence to give you the complete picture of what word we're talking about. So again, we're processing words when we read them in the context of these 4 processing systems. So if you go back to the example of the young man, the jungle gym, we're going to use our context processor, right? This one at the top, to be able to help us figure out what the verb is, right? We have to have the whole, I'm telling you it's a complete sentence, and you're going to go back and read it again and again. Ah, now I know. I never thought man was a verb, an action word. In the second sentence, it's a noun, right? In the third sentence, it's a verb again. Man the fort, gentlemen, but we have man as part of a compound word. I manned the ticket booth at the game. And what about this one? Man, what a day I had. You know what part of speech that is? I'm not going to tell you right now because we're going to come back to it. But you can see where you have to have the context processor at the top of that four-part processing to figure this out. So when we're reading and when we're developing this neurocircuitry that you've heard all about for learning to read, syntax is a big part of it because words have to have a structure to reflect our thoughts. And this is something Marianne Wolf talks about all the time. And then structures need words to give them meaning. This is a quote from a wonderful book, little known, not as well known as Reader Come Home, but another goodie by Marianne Wolf. But this work goes back to Chomsky, who's a very renowned linguist who talked about the importance of syntactic knowledge and how it grows over time. And what makes it grow? Actually, exposure to sophisticated types of reading. And those texts are things that we can read to our kids from birth, and it matters. So proficient comprehension is influenced by adequate syntactic knowledge, just bringing that quote home. So when we talk about syntactic knowledge, the quick definition is it's our ability to understand, and not just understand those sentences, but to create them, a variety of grammatical structures within the context of a sentence, and it supports students' comprehension of text. Another goodie, Wolf, Gottwald et al., serious wordplay. It's in your reference section at the end. I love this text too. It was published in Perspectives, talking about the fact that children who are exposed to a variety of sophisticated written sentences have better comprehension and more syntactic knowledge. Correspondingly, children with highly developed knowledge are better able to comprehend text that has more complex syntax instruction. Because think about it, our oral language develops for free, right? We are wired to acquire language. We just have to hear it, and we have to hear the right amounts of it, and we have to hear the academic language to build that language system. It doesn't come, not every aspect of it comes easily. I don't want to say it that way, because certainly learning to speak and listen is something that kids need to be immersed in to develop. And if you have working memory difficulties, which is something you're born with, that will impact, right? It says, for some, these problems are related to their syntactic knowledge, their understanding to comprehend different sentence structures. Shankweiler and Liberman, who were researchers at Haskins, and I had the pleasure of studying with Isabel Liberman, hypothesized that problems are the result of difficulties retaining and processing information in verbal working memory, because these students struggle with parsing syntactically complex sentence constructions, and you're going to see examples of that. Some of our complex sentences are hard to parse, and what adds to that is students' difficulty hanging on to a big chunk of the sentence, right? Which is part of verbal working memory, so they can get to the end of the sentence and remember what happened at the beginning of the sentence. So let's practice really quick. I'm going to show you a part of a sentence, and you're going to read this out loud in your, wherever you are, or maybe you're just going to read it to yourself. But read it prosodically. So we have, so what would you say? Is this a sentence that exemplifies subject, verb, object, right? Or is it object, verb, subject? We talk about SVO or OVS. So you could put that in the chat. And Tiffany, by the way, you're right. Wow is an interjection. Man is an interjection in that prior slide. So the sunset actually captured my interest. So it actually is subject, verb, object. If I said my interest was captured by the sunset, then it would be OVS, right? Is this a compound or a complex sentence? So Suzanne said compound, and you're right, Suzanne. And why did you say compound? We're going to go back to this if you don't know the answer, so no problem. But what makes it compound, right, Suzanne, is it has a fanboy. It has the conjunction so, which is a coordinating conjunction. Excellent. So what do teachers need to know about sentence instruction? If you haven't read Shanahan's blog, he comes out with a blog every Saturday evening, at least that's when I read it. And I always enjoy reading it because he gives me food for thought. He wrote this blog a couple of years ago now, almost 2 years ago now, and I was thrilled because, I was immersed in syntax. And so reading this, I was like, oh, you just confirmed all the work that we're doing and what I believe is true. He talks about this collection of studies in this blog, and you can go back and Google it and find it. Collection of studies, because that's what Shanahan does. He reads the research and then he digests it for us, so we don't have to read it all. And he gave a lot of examples of studies that found sentence knowledge was important to comprehension as early as 30 months old and throughout the grades K through 12. The studies found syntax mattered with regular classroom kids and kids with dyslexia. They reported the pattern in all these languages. They found syntax to matter with not only native English speakers, but English language learners. So syntax played a significant role in comprehension, both in studies that measured those simultaneously and when we looked at longitudinal research that showed the relationship over time. So I was thrilled. I knew this, but Tim Shanahan reaches lots and lots of teachers. So it made me feel really good about the work that we're doing. So that said, now I've gotten the theory out of the way. I hope you have a better understanding about syntax and syntactic knowledge. We'll keep talking about it a little bit, but now we're really going to get into the meat of the matter here. How do we teach syntax? First, for reading comprehension. And that infographic I showed you a little while ago has the what on the left side, that's the content, the how on the right side, the principles of instruction. By the way, you can get this infographic on the IDA website. And, again, I feel like it's taking a pretty complex concept, the science of reading. How does it relate to structured literacy? It's really important that we use these terms well, and that there is a common understanding about what we mean by them, because people are using them, but I'm not sure they're using them the way that they should be to get the points across. So the how has lots of different pedagogical principles that are important. I'm not going to talk about all of these today, but I am going to highlight explicit and sequential because I'm going to keep coming back to these ideas throughout the rest of the morning. You all, I know, have been doing some great work on grammar and syntax in Ontario, and I was linked to a few documents and resources, and I just wanted to point this one out to you. This scope and sequence goes up through the grades. I just use this first page of the scope and sequence document to just highlight that it talks about where are we doing this work orally? What's the syntax knowledge that we are teaching in each of these grades? Oops, let me go back. Hold on. I am having a hard time seeing this. Okay, sentence composition is another column. So what does that look like in terms of the scope and sequence? What punctuation is taught when, and what word knowledge is taught? And these are your grammatical building blocks, as I refer to them, or parts of speech. So you have a very detailed scope and sequence, which is terrific because the scope and sequence is what makes the instruction and the content sequential, right? If you don't have a sequence, you don't really know where you start this work and where how it develops and progresses over time. Not to say that third grade, fifth grade, eighth grade have mastered all this stuff before, but if we don't know, if teachers don't know what the expectations are for them for teaching this content, then it's, and I don't know how to say it in a better way right now, but it's a crapshoot for what happens. So we don't want that. We want things to happen, systematically. I also took this from something that I saw that you distributed, and I think I like all the work that Oak Hill and Kane, Elbro, Rosenshine have done. Key comprehension strategies that are mentioned that are relevant to today's talk is the sentence structure, as well as the text structure and text types, which we won't go into great detail. But again, these two are pretty inextricably linked. This is your macro structure. This is your micro structure. When Nancy Eberhardt and I wrote this book on syntax, we talked about some big ideas. So I'm going to talk about each of these as we continue to go through this content. Oral language provides the foundation for syntax. There are grammatical elements that have to be explicitly taught. Writing reinforces comprehension, and then teachers' analysis of text is really important. So oral language, I mean, this is so important, but fairly obvious and basic that oral language is the foundation because kids come to the written word with syntactic knowledge. They've been taking statistics. Statistical learning for many kids accounts for how well they can process sentences. And the oral language tasks that we can engage kids in the classroom will help develop their ability to produce and understand a variety of sentences. And we do this work orally, especially in kindergarten, first grade, pre-K, because we know this ability supports reading comp and written expression. And all students will benefit from listening to read alouds with complex sentence, because as they listen to those different sentence structures, they're building their syntactic awareness. Just like phonemic awareness, they're building that as they listen to words. They don't know it until we make them consciously aware of that phonemic awareness, that metalinguistic skill. It's the same thing for syntactic awareness. We're going to make them aware that there are these words inside sentences that if you move them around, it's going to change meaning. Just like if you move a phoneme around, it's going to change the meaning of the word. Oh, I thought this was a funny cartoon because our kids are now so tuned into their devices that they're not reading books as much. So we can't, and audiobooks are good too. So I'm not saying that you can't, use an audiobook in lieu of a hard-covered book, but I don't know that you can get warm and fuzzy. I love the hearts coming up. Warm and fuzzy with a digital device, with a 6-month-old, the way you can with a book with beautiful illustrations. So to that point, I want to talk about picture books or book language. There's been interesting work done on book language. I know you know a lot about it. I'm sure you do. But I was really just serendipitously listened to Mary Ellen McDonald, who has worked with Mark Seidenberg, and she's written a lot about book language, and she did a talk for a group that I'm part of, Lunch and Lit, just last Friday. And I loved listening to her talk about the importance of these picture books used in shared book reading with young children, because these books have complex sentences, and these complex sentences are in the books. They're not in child-directed speech. So this is the only way kids are going to learn these sentence structures, right? This shared book reading is a very important source of language experience for children, as it says, because these sentence structures are otherwise rare in child-directed speech, and I'm going to show you examples of this. The work that's being done describes ways in which the language of picture books varies, potential consequences of differences for the observed benefits of reading to young children. And I love her quote, Mary Ellen's quote. She said, book language doesn't have shared attention. The reader and writer don't know each other. That's the whole idea. Book language is decontextualized. It has to provide the context because we don't know what the context is otherwise. And so those rich language structures are what provide the context. And this is a more recent article that describes this. There are systematic differences that start early in life and matter because kids who have been read to, kids who are immersed in this book language are building their language comprehension skills. And this establishes the foundation for advanced language development, but also for reading. Really important. It establishes the distributional properties that will become inherent in their adult language systems. Can't say enough. And you can read aloud to kids at all ages. I'm sure those of you who teach 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they all like to be read to, right? So it's really important that we continue to do that through the grade levels. In this article that I just referenced here, and it is in your reference, I love this picture that shows the differences between book language and spoken language. And there's lots of differences here. And these are some examples of words that would be considered book language vocabulary. And this is, spoken vocabulary. But what I think is really, in terms of syntax, parts of speech that you see in books, lots of nouns and adjectives versus verbs and pronouns when we're speaking. And in terms of our syntax, as I said, these complex constructions, relative clauses in spoken language, we speak in fragments, right? Or we ask questions. So there's a very big difference in the language of these two systems. I want to give you a couple of examples, but what I mean by that. So this is a beautiful book, Nya's Long Walk, and obviously narrative has a lot of dialogue. But if you read this quickly, you can see where this book language is complex. Even though the sentences aren't long, if you think about the child listening, why would this be complex for them? There's a long way to the water hole. I'll tell mama that you were trouble. So just a quick example, and here's another example from Number the Stars, Lois Lowry's beautiful book. Take a second to read this. A beautiful, beautiful sentence that has so much descriptive language, but you can imagine that this is a difficult sentence would be a difficult sentence for students to comprehend. So one of the take-home messages too in the work that's been done on sentences is that you can't wait to ask questions to the end of whatever it is that the student is reading, a paragraph, a chapter, or whatever, because kids might have confusion right from the get-go. And here's an example from an article that was written a while back. So read this sentence. And the teacher said, "What do you know about Carson now?" And the student said, "They grew up together in the same place." Why did that student answer that way? Because there is a relative clause that described Rachel Carson as a scientist, a writer, and an ecologist. There's a gap between the subject and the predicate with this relative clause, which is extremely common sentence construction. So we have to make sure that kids are comfortable with these different types of sentence constructions. This is an excellent article. It's in your reference. I highly recommend that you read this. There's so much good information in it. So when we're teaching kids about sentences, one of the reasons that we have to do this work and be explicit is we have to clarify ambiguity. And this is how we build syntactic awareness. And I mentioned this a minute ago, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we have to really help students consciously think about, reflect on how words are arranged. And this is a quote from Pinker. about understanding the meaning of individual words and how the order conveys thought. I could ask the question, what color was the house to begin with? We have the same 6 words arranged in different order. What color was the house to begin with? In the first sentence, we know it was red. In the second sentence, we don't know what it was. It could have been red, it could have been white, it could have been purple, right? But that one switch of the red, where we put red before and after house, makes a difference. And we can give an example of this too, where we have the blue sky, where sky is a noun, and sky blue, where sky is an adjective. Obviously changes the function of the word where it's placed in terms of the order. So at the heart of our approach to teaching syntax is this idea that we're going to teach kids what is the function of the word, of the phrase, of the clause. Because when they understand that the words and phrases and clauses do function in have different roles, they will understand sentences more thoroughly and more accurately. So we have a kernel sentence with 2 words, and then we have an elaborated sentence with a noun phrase, right? Which birds, what kind of birds? They were birds of all types. They were nocturnal, they were nocturnal birds. And which ones were they? They were the birds of all types. We have our predicate, and when did they fly throughout the night? So the next big idea when we teach syntax to kids is this idea that there are these grammatical elements. We call them the building blocks of syntax. We don't refer to them as parts of speech because parts of speech is too vague and abstract, especially for little kids. So we're going to call them blocks or building blocks because each block has a function. And, a quick little review. This sentence has all the grammatical building blocks in it: an interjection, a pronoun, conjunction, adjective, noun, verb, preposition, as I said, adverb. One thing I will point out here that in our Common Core state standards in the United States, which most of our states still use as the standards, we call the a determiner or an article, but it actually serves as an adjective too. So there are actually 8 grammatical building blocks that you see here. And these 8 building blocks are somewhat color-coded because these relate to each other. These relate to each other. Prepositions, conjunctions, and pronouns. We're going to call meaning links, and I'll explain what I mean by that as we continue to go along. And then our interjections that are kind of hanging out there all alone. They're not very common. So explicit instruction for sentence comprehension involves comprehension and this idea that grammatical awareness improves comprehension and memory for what was read. And the way that it works is that children cluster words into meaningful syntactic units. Sometimes it's a phrase, sometimes it might be a clause. If it's a short couple of word clause, then that's the syntactic unit. But the idea is that those phrases, those units are meaningful and they help build meaning, and they also support memory of what was read. So reading instruction really should include the phrase level, the sentence level instruction, not just word level instruction. And that's a take-home message I want you all to think about. Reading fluency, yes, there's a time when we want kids to read words in a word list in isolation to build the accuracy and automaticity, but it's really important that they're immediately putting those words into phrases and sentences. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of activities, and I want you to think about Linnea Airey's phases. This is a slide that Louisa Moats incorporated into a paper that she wrote in 2022. But I'm sure that most, if not all of you, know about these phases of word reading development. And so we have the pre-alphabetic phase where kids are not reading yet, right? They haven't discovered the alphabetic principle. Once they do, during this early alphabetic phase, that's when we shift immediately into getting kids to practice word reading through decoding and encoding and phonemic awareness activities. And so that they get through this later full alphabetic phase, because it actually takes a while for kids to get through that alphabetic phase because there's so many different patterns in English. And then we eventually want them to get to that consolidated stage where every word, by and large, is a sight word. So you're going to see sort of how these activities progress. But before I get into that, I want to just make sure that we're clear what we can teach our students, especially beginning right at the beginning, kindergarten. What is a sentence? A lot of teachers teach that it's a complete thought. Others say it makes sense. Others tell kids it has a capital letter and a period. And I maintain that those may all be true, but that's not going to teach the function of the sentence. And that's what I'm after. I want kids to know, how does a sentence function? So, because otherwise, if they think it's a capital letter and a period, they would say this is a sentence. And our kids write a lot of fragments, right? And they actually speak a lot of fragments. So another one of my things is, when you ask a question, make sure your students answer it with a complete sentence. Oral language is so important. It might be a question that they could answer with one word. It's mandatory that you respond with a complete sentence. So what we teach our kids is, it is a who or a what doing something. So the little kids, and you'll see a video in a minute, little kids say it's a who and a do. We eventually want them to know the who could be called a namer and the do is an action. As they get more sophisticated with their terminology, the namer is now a noun, the action is now a verb, and ultimately they understand subject predicate, right? But the lingo matters. So for little kids, I don't need them to call it a subject and a predicate. Some of them may, great, but I want them to know the function. It's a who doing something, right? So that's the important thing. So we have a simple subject, a compound subject, a complete subject. We have a simple predicate, a compound subject. Oh, this should say predicate. Sorry, my mistake. Didn't catch that. Should say compound predicate, complete predicate. So again, I'm just going to go through the grammatical building blocks in a way so that you can sort of have an idea of how we teach these. We teach the nouns as namers because they name people, places, things, and ideas. That's the concept. And so to cue the kids, if they write a sentence like this one, oh boy, played all morning in the sandbox, you would say, who played? Oh, I played, but I don't see that in the sentence. So that's the question. We want to cue them with who did it or what did it. Verbs, most all tell what nouns do. So they're action words. That's their function, right? They answer the question, did what? City dog did what? City dog jumped, right? But some verbs link. Okay, and what is the function of a linking verb? It links or connects, right? So you could say city dog is what? City dog is the frog's new friend. And because there's so many verbs that are linking verbs, right, we have to teach that concept early on. Now, one of the first activities we would do with little kids to make sure they can distinguish between a namer, right, and an action is to label, right, or name, or to understand that a namer names a person, place, or thing. So you can actually have them say that definition. Lots of kids say to you, a noun is a person, place, or thing, but they're missing the word names. So we want to make sure if you're asking them to define a noun, say a noun names it, right? And what does a verb do? It tells action. It tells what the namers do or feel. And I'm going to show a video now. And again, if you can't see or hear it, please tell me and I'll make sure that you can. And I'm going to turn my mute on so you can't hear this annoying app.
How to open your car door while submerged underwater. A fatal construction flaw in all recent automobiles.
And I will be demonstrating the word. I'm Wendy, a Literacy How mentor, and I will be demonstrating the word function sort, which can be found in the Literacy How Syntax Handbook. The purpose of this lesson is to have our students think about the job or the function of words in their sentences. Today we'll be working on the namer and the action and having our students figure out whether the word that we're asking them to read is a noun, a person, place, or thing, or is it an action word, a doing word. I have chosen words out of a decodable text. So that means that this is a stage 1 lesson. A stage 1 lesson simply means that all of the words that I've chosen, I know that my students can sound out. And this would be in preparation for my reading a decodable text with my students. So the primary purpose is to think about the function or the role of these words, but it's also good to have our students read these words again and again before they get into the connected text. It's also good for working on some vocabulary. It will also give them an idea of what the story will be about because of the words that I've chosen. So I will be using a decodable text called The Bad Hiss by Jill Lauren, and is part of her whole phonics decodable text series. So here I have 2 headings here. I have my namer heading, which are my nouns, person, place, or thing. Make sure that you do a nice job of setting your students up for what namer means. You are naming something, so a person, a place, or a thing. If you feel like this label isn't going to be enough information for your students, please do draw a sketch here or use some hand signals or gestures to help your students remember that namer means a person, a place, or a thing. And then our action word is our doing words and our verbs. So I've collected a stack of words here from my decodable text, and I'm ready to go. So I would show the students exactly what I want them to do. They would get this Post-it note. I would show them how I could sound it out, b-a-g, and then read it fast, bag, and then I would have to think about, is that word a person, a place, or a thing, or is it an action? So I would slide this word over here underneath the namer because it is a thing. Here we have the Post-it note sat. Once again, this time after showing them what I mean by this lesson, it might be a we do. So I would have us all sound out this word, sat, read it fast, sat, and then decide where it goes. Is it a person, place, or thing? Is it naming something, or is it an action word? So they would decide that sat is an action word. And then I would give them each a Post-it note and give everybody an opportunity to sort out, to read and sort the words between the namers and the actions. So here we have the word web straight from the story. It's a namer. I would slide it over there. Here is another word from the story, hid. A student can decode it and then decide it's an action and slide it over here, and so on and so forth, sorting out the various Post-it notes. So I want to show you what is fairly typical in decodable texts is that many of the words could be multiple meaning words. And in fact, there are several in this story. And one of them is the word rocks. So we would have a student decode the word rocks and decide, are we thinking about rocks as a thing, where we would slide it over to the namer? Or somebody might come up with the idea that rocks is an action word. So please do be prepared to add some more sticky notes and to celebrate that our students know that there is more than one meaning for the word rocks. So like, grandma rocks my baby brother to sleep every night. Same with the word bugs. Some students would read that word and decide that we're talking about the insects. So we would slide it under the namer column. But another student might say, hey, wait a minute. My sister bugs me or annoys me all the time, bothers me. So do have a Post-it note ready to type in or write in the bugs and celebrate that your students know that bugs could have more than one meaning. After you finish sorting the words, please do have them read all of these words over again for extra rehearsal, and then also read all of the action words for extra practice. If time allows, you could do a little bit of an extension activity by adding the word the on a Post-it note and perhaps adding a period on a Post-it note, and then having our students build a super simple sentence using the word the and choosing a Post-it note from the namer side. So we might have the pals, and then choosing a word from the action column and building this very simple sentence, the pals hid, and then adding a period here. So this is a great activity to work on namers and actions, the functions of words in sentences, and at the same time add more rehearsal for the decoding of these words, and then showing them how we can build very simple sentences, selecting a namer and an action from each column.
All right. So I think a couple people raised their hand. I don't know if this is a question that it's a good time for a question. I'll leave it up to my facilitators to decide on that one.
Well, Margie, I do, and this actually might be something that you may be planning to unpack. So feel free to tell me to settle down for a bit. But there was a question about wondering if you could unpack why the labels, why the headers for those sorts are namers and actions instead of noun and verb. Could you dig into that a little bit more in terms
Absolutely.
of why
Yeah,
that might be helpful?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, the terminology matters in the sense that for a little kid, do they need to know the label noun? Eventually, yes, they do. But what I'm getting at is for a 5-year-old, it's more important that that 5-year-old understands that the who is a namer. We call it namer because it names, right? Verbs are easier. They're action words. Kids get that pretty easily. Adjectives are describing words. But I think the biggest one that can be a stumbling block for young kids is the word noun. And I'm okay with using the word noun. You could say, I'm going to put the label noun next to neighbor, just so you remember that a noun does that, it names. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. And I don't see any other questions popping up. We do have that Q&A space in the toolbar. So feel free to keep popping those in, but I think you're all set.
Great, great, great. And so just moving along, because time is moving, speaking of moving along, just again, to get the concept, if you were doing this with kids who are not reading yet, they're at the pre-alphabetic stage, you would have them sort pictures. And then after they've sorted the pictures into a namer column and a doing column, or a who and a do, you could then ask them to put pictures together and say the sentence orally, because we're going to be building oral language as we're building the concept of a sentence. The duck swims, right? And Wendy in her demonstration talked about words with multiple meanings, and I know that a lot of you are teaching kids with dyslexia and other word reading difficulties using decodable text. And this is just an example. She mentioned this as well. These are all closed syllable words that are considered multiple meaning words. I was going to ask you to find a word in your read aloud that can be a namer and an action. Which function are your students most familiar with? But I'm going to skip that for now because I want to keep moving along. But that's just something to think about. A lot of those words that you see here can also be used as actions. And sometimes kids don't know that action, right? They may be very familiar with the plant, right, that grows in the yard, but when you plant something, they might not know the verb. Bike, they know it as a namer, but they might not know it as a verb. So just make sure your kids know both uses of those multiple meaning words. So we're going to talk about interpreting word meaning here in terms of those multiple meaning words, because what you have to help your kids do once they see those multiple meaning words is you have to show them the sentence and help them to understand, is that word functioning as a namer or is it functioning as an action word, right? And because again, some of the obscure meanings of multiple meaning words are ones that kids are less familiar with. So you saw the word function sort where we named and sorted pictures of nouns and verbs, and then we could combine pictures to create oral sentences. You saw Wendy do a sort with decodable nouns and verbs and combining them to create oral sentences. And then at the consolidated stage, you would do this with a text that is more sophisticated. Again, making sure that the kids really know subject and predicate and can find those subjects and predicates in a meatier text, because we can't assume that they can do that. I'm showing this slide again because here I want to focus on these groups of words that work together to answer a functional question. Because when we get into adverbs, and that's what we're going to talk about next, we talk about actions telling us more about the verb. That's the function of an adverb, right? So it answers the questions when, where, how. It can also answer the question why, but we're going to stick with these three questions initially. Now, just think about this, because adverbs can be single words like tomorrow and yesterday, right? There and here, suddenly, softly, and quickly, but also actions or adverbs can be part of a phrase. And these would be called adverbial phrases. On Tuesday, in the dark ages, around the block. So that whole phrase serves the role of telling more about the verb. We can also have actions that adverbs that are part of an adverbial clause after the storm ended, as the crowd excitedly cheered on the team. So I want you to think about this, because we are going to focus on the phrases, especially when we get into more complex sentences. But we can start our work with this action telling me more with a picture prompt. Like, a kernel sentence is with this picture: the boy fell. Where did the boy fall? When did the boy fall, right? The hurricane formed. Where did it form? When did it form? And just doing this orally is a great warm up, right? For getting kids to think about these adverbial phrases. And we can use sticky notes, right? We don't need to put words on these. If we're doing this activity with a first grader, we don't need to write the words down. We can just have these sticky notes function, right? The boy fell, right? And then each sticky note represents the answer to the question where or when. And the reason for doing this is sentence variety, right? We have this hurricane formed rapidly over the Gulf of Mexico in early September. Again, we want the kids to be able to speak these sentences orally, these sentences that have lots of description and that are telling where did this form, how did it form, when did it form, right? And you could say, how else could you write this sentence or speak this sentence? We can move the word rapidly to the beginning. Rapidly, the hurricane formed. So you're really getting across this idea that words can move around in the sentence. Sometimes it changes the meaning and sometimes it doesn't. So again, we do this orally until the kids can actually write these sentences themselves. but the idea is that we're teaching them how sentences work. And this is another example where we're going to identify an action verb within a phrase or a clause. We're going to sort the kind of information that is used to expand the verb and use those expanded verb phrases in complete sentences. So here's what I'd like you to do right now. We're at 10:20. We have 10 more minutes till our break. I want you to take just a moment to look at the text that you brought, and I want you to find a where phrase or when phrase, right? And just do that. And then once you find that, I'm going to explain what you might do for your students. So if you have a read aloud, find a where phrase, a when phrase, or a how phrase. Or you can find a singular adverb. And when you find that, I'd love to have somebody put that sentence, actually put the entire sentence in the chat box. Okay, so Brenda had a good one, and he spread them across his desk. So he spread is your kernel sentence across the desk where? Over the waves we paddle. So this is a tricky sentence. We paddle where? Over the waves. Or you could even say how? Over the waves. Away from the beach. Where? To the water's deep blue. Those are really nice adverbial phrases. Excellent. So you did a great job. Thank you for finding those sentences. And again, the purpose of this is to analyze your text so that if there's a tricky sentence, like one of you, the one that you put here, over the waves we paddle, away from the beach, that is a tricky sentence construction because you have to figure out what are they talking about over the waves. Then you figure out it's we paddle, right? And that's a lot of times sentences can be, tricky about that, with that. So these are just some other things that we are going to come back to with analyzing your text, but I'm going to keep moving forward. I do want to answer a question, a really good question that St. Thomas Aquinas asked about reading aloud to the students, and is it important to have students read along with the text? And I actually think there's a place for that, but I agree with you that I'd rather have the students, if you can encourage them to do this, to just listen, because they get distracted by the print and the pictures. If you're reading the book to them, you really are building language and listening comprehension. You're not worried about reading comprehension at that point. And for me, I listen better when I am sort of listening to the words. And I completely agree with you. When I watch a show with closed captions, and I'm reading the captions, I often miss the big ideas. So not to say that you can't do that afterwards, but I also like the idea of reading to them and ask them to make their own images, visualize what you think the character looks like, and then I'll show you a picture of what the illustrator thought the character looked like. So really important, I think, to think about that. Now, let me do this. Let me go back, to an earlier slide. Oh boy, I didn't know this was going to be hard to show you a picture of, or show you a video of Action Tell Me More. So we'll watch this video and then we'll take our break. So again, if you don't see it or hear it, let me know.
my phone, my wallet, passport, and tablet. This bag
All right, so let's put these words out. And what we have to do when we have a scrambled sentence, we have to find the action word, the word that is called the verb. What word here is the doing word? Like if you were talking about the who do, it's the do.
Ride.
Ride, yeah. You can ride, right? Sit down in a car and you ride, or you ride a bike. So that's going to be our doing word. Okay? Oh, what did you want to say about this?
Skip.
That's a doing word, but you know what? Since it's a capital, this is actually a person's name. Okay? Because you could have the name Skip. All right, so here's our do, ride. Who? Now, so let's go with a who do. Who is going to ride?
Skip. Stand. Stand.
You're right and you're right.
Stand and skip.
Correct. Put that in front, please. All right, so now what does it say?
Stand and skip. Ride.
Good. All right, what do we have left?
Down the hill. The hill. The hill. The hill went down. It is now went
We have stand and skip, ride. Now, down.
the hill.
Oh, there you go. Does that tell us when or where or why? Down the hill. Does that tell us where they're going? Where are they going?
Down the hill.
It does tell us where. Does it tell us when? They didn't know. It tells us where. So who, do, where. Who's doing it? Stand and skip. What are they doing?
Riding.
Riding. Where are they riding?
Down
the hill. Great job. Now you guys are going to do one yourselves. When you find your verb, tell me what you think your verb is. Hit. That's a doing word. Who hits? The boys hit. All right. Let's see. What do you have so far?
The two boys hit.
The two boys hit. What could the two boys hit?
Who's ready to
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing because it is 10:28 and I said we have a break in 2 minutes. So any questions about that video before we break? All right, so let's take our break. We're going to come back at 10:45 and we're going to hit the ground running because I have a lot more to share with you. Look forward to it. Enjoy your break.
Smirty.
All good?
All good. Thanks.
Okay, great. You let me know when you want me to start again, Una.
I am all set. I was just about to say I have 10:45. If you are good to get rolling, I am too.
Excellent.
As you're, if we can multitask, as you're pulling up your slide, I do see a question, the Q&A about subject, object, verb, and object, verb, subject. From Andrea. I think the way we should teach kids to write sentences is the subject, object, verb way. Is this right? My next question is this. Let's say we have an object, verb, subject sentence. Would the subject of the sentence always be in the beginning of the sentence? This is the Q&A if it's easier for you to look at it, to read it as you answer.
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. So subject, verb, object is just easier because, you know, the who, what the subject is about, or sorry, what the sentence is about comes first, and then what they're doing comes next, and there may or may not be an object. So Mary kicked the ball. Is easier than the ball, which is the object, was kicked by Mary. So the ball is the object. So it's object, verb, subject. So we usually say SVO is canonical order. OVS is non-canonical order. It's usually passive tense, but not always. And it's just, yeah, exactly, Amanda. It's passive versus active. And it's just easier for kids to start with that. But so many sentences have non-canonical order. So it's just good for you as a teacher to recognize what may trip a kid up in a sentence. And that's why we're doing this work today, just sort of being analytical with the sentences. And we'll talk more about that toward the end. But it's a great question.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay.
All right. So sharing my screen again. Here's what I'd like you to do before we leave this idea of action, tell me more, expanding an action. You gave me wonderful examples from your text. Now I want you to just do a quick thing with your sentence slam. So take a kernel sentence, birds fly, or whatever your animal and action might have been, and expand it with a where or a when phrase, and just put it in the chat real quick. And then Perth, I will come back to your question. So just dogs growl when they are frightened. Dogs sniff when on their morning walk. Thomas ventured where out of the house. Perfect. Excellent. So this is something you could do with your kids, you know, have them create a sentence slam, and it doesn't have to be dogs, or it doesn't have to be animals and actions. It could be something related to what you're studying. But it gives them an example of, you know, just sort of starting with a complete, you know, a kernel sentence with a subject and a predicate, and then adding more, telling more about the action. And now let me thank you for sharing. Excellent. Easy thing to do. Right now, Perth, you asked about words correct per minute. What I was saying about that at the beginning was that we use oral reading fluency as a proxy for reading comprehension. And we look at those norms and we take them seriously because it gives us an idea if a student is able to read at the 25th or the 50th or the 75th percentile, the Hasbrook and Tyndall norms. And I really like those. What I like mostly about those norms is that you can see the range from reading at the 25th percentile or, you know, meeting that 25th percentile goal or benchmark versus the 90th. There's a big range in terms of speed, words correct per minute. And what I was saying is, if you have students who have slow processing speed, they're born with that. That means that they are going to mostly, not 100%, but usually that translates into reading fluency rate, right? And being able to retrieve the name of a word retrieval, naming speed can be measured very easily. The CTOP does it with digits or numbers or colors. And it's a really good way to know if a student is going to be slow at processing, and that means they're going to be a slow reader. So telling them to read faster actually gets them more anxious and is not helpful. So I think that was my point. And it's not about how fast you read. It's about, are you reading the words accurately? And can you lift them off the page automatically? That's important. So I hope that clarifies that, and I'm going to move on. And maybe I can come back to your idea of teaching linking verbs. I think it's linking, connecting, showing any kind of visual that shows the dog is hungry or the dog is, whatever. The girl is happy, and showing a connection between the girl and a grin or whatever it may be. All right, so let's go on. And now we're gonna talk about namers. Tell me more. Obviously, what word tells more about the namer? It's an adjective. And what is a function of an adjective? It answers 3 questions: how many, what kind, and which one. And you can see in this table that you can answer those questions with a single word or a phrase or a clause. So it can be an adjectival, it can be an adjective, it can be an adjectival phrase or an adjectival clause. Again, that's not necessarily important for the kids to know that terminology, but it's important for you to know that we want kids to use those phrases to describe, which one, which boy. It was the boy next to the home plate, the boy who lived next door, the jacket that has big pockets, because those words are descriptive. And I'm going to show you another video of a first grade classroom, and the teacher does a nice job of explaining this to her students, so you can see what this might look like in action.
If you're thinking about getting great internet at a great price, good thinking.
Today you're going to learn how to take your simple sentences and expand them and make them bigger and juicier to help the reader create a picture in their mind. So if you look at this little girl, you see she has like a little thought bubble. What is she picturing in her mind, Daniel? Yeah, she's picturing that you think that that's her, that she's riding a horse, and that is going to be shown in her writing. So when we write, we're actually causing the reader to create those mental pictures in their mind. And if we use just simple sentences, it's really hard for the reader to do that. You want to make your sentences big and make them juicy. So who can try to come up with a simple sentence? Remember, a namer is a noun. It's a person, place, or thing. And an action is what that namer is doing, the action in the sentence. Who can tell me just the namer? Brayden, what's the namer for this?
A goldfish.
A goldfish. And I love that he was really specific. He didn't just say a fish, he said a goldfish, because that's already helping me make mental images in my mind of your sentence. What's the action that this fish is doing, Callie?
Swimming.
The fish is swimming, right? The fish is swimming. Can anyone put that and tell me the whole simple sentence, Giselle? The goldfish is swimming. Now, Brayden did a great job of saying goldfish. He already expanded his sentence by saying what kind of fish. You can do it in 3 different ways. So in this example, we use dogs. You could talk about how many dogs. You can talk about what kind of dog, so the big dog or the small dog, or you could talk about which dog. The dog laying by the tree or the dog on a leash. But today, we're only going to focus on what kind. And there's many different ways you can talk about what kind. And we've been studying adjectives in first grade. And adjectives describe a noun. It could describe the color of a noun, the size, the texture, the age, and the shape. I would like you to talk and brainstorm with your partner. word bank. Now it's time to take that knowledge and apply it to sentences. So let's look at this namer. What is this? What is a namer for this picture? Louis? A wolf. So can you give me
Hey, Ryan Reynolds.
Okay, I'm stopping sharing that because I don't want to run out of time and I want to get to other things. And I think you get the idea. I like how Gail walked them through what adjectives are, what they do, and the word bank, which was really great. If you want to see the whole video, just go on our YouTube channel. It's on the bottom of our website. But you can start this activity getting kids to tell more about the name or the noun with pictures. So who did what? And, you know, the kids can just tell this orally. The butterflies flutter. How many butterflies? 3 butterflies, right? 3 butterflies fluttered or flew, whatever word you want. What kind of butterflies? Monarch butterflies fluttered. So you just use the sticky notes as a way to get that point across. Butterflies with colorful wings fluttered. So there's, you know, important to do this orally. We also want to identify this action verb within the phrases and clauses because we've talked about these adjectival phrases and adjectival clauses. So we have dozens of flowers, many butterflies, what kind, ruby red, delicate. And again, which one? Now we're going to answer that question with an adjectival phrase, right? Which eggs? The eggs on the leaf. Which garden? The garden by the house. Because it's this whole phrase that actually tells more or describes the noun or the namer. And again, really doing this kind of explicit instruction and deliberate practice with adjective types, I think, is really effective because adjectives can be classified the way Gail did in the video in these various ways. And then once you have your students brainstorm all of these adjectives based on these categories, then you can ask them to add the adjectives to a specific noun or namer. Now, I want to show this video of Elke, and Elke is with a kindergarten class, and I want you to think about, you could just jot down some things that you notice, especially how Elke incorporates not just syntax into this lesson, but she reviews some word reading skills that the kindergarten children have been working on. She reinforces the idea of who and do. She also does a really nice job with expansion of the words in that kernel sentence. And then she tries to work on fluency, which is a little challenging because kindergarten children don't think and are not reading in those grammatical phrases yet, but she does try to get that point across with these kids. You'll see in this video.
Are you constantly overwhelmed with your workload? Look at this schedule, perfectly organized and managed with every
You know the gesture, Kate. This one? Do everybody make this gesture? Look, they're all right here too, with the letters that it goes with. So today, now that you're warmed up, you know what our vowels say, right? You're not going to have a difficult time reading these words. So I'm going to have you read some words. You have to decide if the word that you're reading tells me who, so that means it could be a person, a place, or a thing, or an animal, or does it tell me an action? Is my word an action word that I'm reading? All right, so let's read this first word together. Oh, let's find, I see that was fast. Is run, is that a who, or is that something we do? It's something we do. Can you put it under the do column, please?
Hop, hop, hop.
Okay, is it a who or is it something we do?
Do.
Can you make your fingers hop? You can, if you can make it happen, it's something that you do. There. All right, so now we have who's and we have do's. And in order to make a sentence, you have to have a who and a do. You get to choose who you want to talk about and what they're going to do. And we're going to start off our sentence where we're going to say with a capital letter. So now say this. The
frog swims.
Good. You want to use it? Pull that over. All right. And look what you said, swims, and that's so great. Guess what I have? I have your S there because we don't say the frog swim. We say the frog
Swims.
And then what do I have to, what do you think is on my last card?
Period.
All right. Can you say your sentence now? Go ahead and say it.
The frog swims.
Have your students say it. You're the teacher. Say, okay, everybody say the sentence.
Okay, everybody sing the sentence. The frog swims.
Now, can you add to it for me? Can you tell me where he swims? Who could tell me where he swims?
In the pond.
In the pond?
Yeah.
Okay, let me put these out. In the pond. Good. Let's read that sentence now. Ready to go.
The frog swims in the pond.
I'm going to change it to this. Now what does the sentence say? Read the sentence to me.
The frog swims.
And thing we do. Can you?
Okay, I'm going to stop playing the video because I understand that was a little hard to hear, but I did want you to get a feeling for how Elke does a nice job of working on this in terms of building their knowledge of what a sentence is and then expanding beyond just the subject and the predicate or the who and the do. And also, I really like the way that she reinforces subject-verb agreement with a little sticky note. Very simple, but very effective, because that is something that needs explicit instruction. Not all kids need that, but many do. I also wanted to just highlight some of the things that you shared with me from your syntax project, which is really amazing. All those wonderful PowerPoints that you have for all the grade levels. And, you know, it's just great to see, you know, that you have this content that your teachers can access. So I just wanted to recognize that I went through a lot of it. And here you see the who or the what, did, when, crossed out the where because I guess it doesn't have a where, I'm not sure, how and why. So we're doing the same kind of expansion of the predicate or the verb here. And another activity kids love is the sentence scramble. In one of the videos I showed you of Elke where they had the index cards and they had to take those cards and unscramble them and make a sentence. You could take a sentence from a book. This one comes from Molly Lou Mellon. And here's the scrambled sentence. And the idea is that you ask the students to first find the verb or the action word. So you can find it. I'll give you a second to find it. So it started, right? And then who started? And then Mary Lou Mellon started. And what did she start? She started school. When did she start school? Right? And then you have fall. In the fall, how did she start? With the big yellow backpack. So you can take sentences right out of their text and do a sentence scramble and do this questioning strategy where they first have to find the action word or the verb and then the who, and then expand the when, where, and tell more about the noun as well. What I will say is if you do this activity, you want to be very selective with the sentences that you choose. So start with one clause, right? If you have a lot of, if you have more than one clause, then you're going to have more than one verb. So you start with a simple sentence. We've talked about namers or nouns. We've talked about verbs. We've adverbs, adjectives. Now I want to talk about meaning links. And there's 3 classes of meaning links: prepositions, pronouns, and conjunctions. And these words connect or link other words, phrases, and clauses to make meaning. Dutra and Moran refer to these words as the mortar words. They're the words that act like lexical glue to connect ideas. And they're tricky because they're words that are like meaningless, right? Basically by themselves. They have to be with other words to create meaning, but they're super important to link meaning. They're also considered or called cohesive ties, and that signal how information is related in text. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about prepositions. Prepositions show relationship in space or position, and then relationship in time. Some express space and time. They function, like I said, as a signaling relationship between words. And you could see an adverbial prepositional phrase, where the dog ran, and you can see an adjectival or adjectival prepositional phrase, which dog ran. Here's an excerpt from Number the Stars, and you can see there are prepositional phrases in every text that kids are going to read. And so they have to understand, how do those prepositions work? How do they function? They always are part of a phrase. That means they're always going to have a noun. And again, if I had more time, I thought I would have so much time with 3 hours, but it goes so fast. But I would have had you take some time to look for a prepositional phrase in the text that you brought. What I will point out to you that there are these concrete prepositions that you see the list of. This comes from a presentation William Van Cleve did a number of years ago. So these concrete prepositions, but we also have advanced prepositions that are also tricky. And you're going to find these prepositions in, like I said, every text that you teach. And they're challenging because they're not as concrete as other parts of speech or building blocks. So to make it more digestible, understandable, we make use of real concrete objects, use content-related images for producing some of these where phrases, when phrases, and instruct students to use the preposition to expand sentences. So for little kids, we'll just use objects and put them in or over or under to show the position of the prepositions and what they're signaling. And then when students are reading sentences, we're going to have them expand, the noun, where the chrysalis is, where the caterpillar is, where the butterfly is, where. So they're going to answer these questions or fill in the blank with a prepositional phrase that answers the question, where. One of the things that we might ask our students to do is to deconstruct a sentence. And that's another technique that's very effective if you have a sentence that you think is going to be challenging. This is an excerpt from The Empty Pot. You might, first, you're going to ask yourself, what kind of sentence is this? Is it a simple, compound, or complex sentence? And we know that it is what? A compound, because it has a coordinating conjunction and the conjunction, as I said, is and we're going to ask questions about the first clause. Who or what is the sentence about? It's about news, right? And what kind of news? Special news, right? And what did the news do? It created. What did it create? Excitement, right? So you can just go through questioning or asking these questions to help students deconstruct or make sense of the sentence. And then you would do the same thing for the second clause. And again, in the interest of time, I was going to have you do this yourselves and jot down the questions you might ask of this second clause. Children from all over the country swarmed to the palace, but your questions would be similar to these. Another example of a very challenging sentence from Hatchet. How would we get our students to deconstruct this sentence? How can we get them to understand this complex sentence? First, we want them to find the verb. Okay, we could ask them to find the subject and the predicate, right? But let's say we're going to have them find it. You don't find that verb until here, dropped. Look at all this text that precedes the word dropped, right? And so now we have to figure out what dropped, and we have to go back now and reread the sentence. It's the windstorm that dropped. What did it drop? It dropped pines, right? Where? Across each other. So again, you do the sentence deconstruction through a set of questions that you ask, and kids can then piece together and make meaning of the sentence. And I've just color coded it here. That's another strategy you can learn, you can use, where you're chunking the text in these grammatical entities, whether they're phrases or they're clauses, whatever they may be, but they're really there to create the meaning that we've talked about is so important. Another meaning link is a pronoun. I'm not going to show this video, but it's on our YouTube channel. You'll see one of our mentors who teaches very explicitly how pronouns work. We use the same questions as we do for nouns, right? For students to be able to know which, what he is referring to in this first set of sentences. The dog sat on a rock. Who's he? He is the dog, right? The farmhouse stood. What was white? It was the farmhouse. So we can have them put an arrow back to the noun that the pronoun is referencing. And just to give you some text from Nya's long walk that I showed you earlier, look at all the pronouns in this on this one page. What is who is she referring to? What does she mean by it's too far? And you've walked this. What's this refer to? So again, these pronoun references are in all the texts. Our multilingual learners have a lot of trouble with these pronouns. Here's a higher level text from ReadWorks with a Lexile 1050. And this text also has a lot of pronouns in it. And the simple thing to do is just have the students find the pronouns and then draw a line back to what the pronouns are referring to. The third class of meaning links are conjunctions. So conjunctions come in two varieties. They can be coordinating, or they could be subordinating, where they're joining unequal parts. And here's a list of conjunctions, right? The coordinating junctions, the fanboys, and the subordinating conjunctions. And this is just a short list. There are many more than these, but I like the way these subordinating conjunctions are categorized by time, place, cause, manner, because conjunctions are hard for kids. Again, they're very abstract. Some of them are more concrete than others, but by and large, they're pretty abstract, but they're super, super important to building coherence when kids are reading. So they have to know about clauses, and an independent clause is a sentence. It has a subject and a predicate. A compound sentence has two independent clauses. It can actually have more, but it has to have at least two, and they are usually, those two clauses are usually joined by a fanboy, but you have semicolon taking the place of a coordinating conjunction as well. I'm looking at my watch, and I'm going to see where I am in my PowerPoint, because I think I'm going to need to keep going to get to the end. So I'm not going to ask you to find a compound sentence in your read alouds, but that's what I, really wanted you to do today, is to bring the text as I'm talking. If you want to look for one, that's great. A lot of times when I do this with teachers, they might pick a sentence that looks like it has, it looks like it's a compound sentence because it has a fanboy. This excerpt has 3 buts, right? But we do have 3 compound sentences because the but has to be followed, or the fanboy has to be followed by a subject and a predicate. So if this sentence said, I planted the seed you gave me and I watered it every day, but didn't sprout, that wouldn't really make sense. But if it's left out the subject, which a lot of times the subject is left out, then technically it is not a compound sentence. A dependent clause is also referred to as a subordinate clause. It includes a subordinating conjunction, a subject, and a verb. That dependent clause does not express a complete thought because it begins with one of these subordinating conjunctions. So it doesn't make sense. As he left the house. If we took off the word as, he left the house, then you have an independent clause. But it's the presence of that subordinating conjunction that makes it dependent on the independent clause. And here's an example, 2 examples from Nya's Long Walk, where you have the dependent clause followed by the independent clause, and another example where you have an independent clause followed by a dependent clause. And I would have had you find a complex sentence in your read aloud, but I am going to pass on that. But this is something that I'd like you to just practice if you're not familiar. Some of you have this down, but if you're not familiar and don't know about subordinating clauses, it would be worth practicing that. It's also important for you to know what a relative clause is, because there's tons of these in our texts. And relative clauses, which a relative clause is a dependent clause, it follows a noun, but in this case, it follows a noun. You have Anne Marie admitted to herself that she was glad to be an ordinary person who would never be called upon for courage. So you have the noun followed by the relative clause, and it's those relative pronouns by and large begin those relative clauses, and they're always adjective clauses. Why? Because they modify the noun. I'm looking again and pacing what I'm doing here. This is a really great little video. It's on our YouTube channel of paragraph shrinking, because this is something that we want our students to be able to do, is to take a paragraph, find the most important information and shrink it to 10 words or less. So they're basically getting the gist. And it's a cute video. Like I said, you can find it on our YouTube channel, where the child has to find the first step, find the most important who or what, then tell the most important thing about the who or what, and say the idea in 10 words or less. Paragraph shrinking, otherwise referred to as getting the gist. I have to talk for just a moment about punctuation, because that is absolutely a big part of teaching syntax. Determining punctuation use is part of syntax. And I will remind you, I don't have to do this because you all know this, our kids read right through those punctuation marks or use them randomly in their writing. So we have to teach them explicitly about those punctuation marks. Trees, in the first example here, is possessive, right? In the second example, the word is plural because it's missing that apostrophe, and apostrophes are very challenging for kids. These are our sentence types, and we can teach our punctuation marks with when we teach those sentence types, and we teach them what the function of, in the interest of our functional grammar approach, what is the function of a period? It tells us to stop. What is the function of a question mark? It tells us that we're asking something, right? What's the function of an exclamation point, right? It shows surprise. So we can have these picture prompts when we're first teaching our students about these. But now I want to talk about phrasing and prosody, because as I said at the very beginning of this webinar, our students that have difficulty with reading fluency often have difficulty with the phrasing part. They're so busy and so focused on reading the word accurately that they are not able to phrase and read prosodically. And so are getting more for, what's the best way to say this? I've been talking for 2.5 hours, so I'm a little tongue-tied at this point. But we're going to get more bang for our buck when we use that syntax in our reading wheel, because we can teach prosody of reading fluency and explicitly teach about syntax. Just in terms of measuring prosody, we have the NAEP fluency scale, which I think is one of the best ways of determining what a student's prosody is, right? And it's 4-point scale, not from non-fluent to fluent, but it has different scales within the scale. And one of them is phrasing. So we're going to think about the students' phrasing, and we have the scale from 1 to 4. What are we looking for? What are we listening for? And this quote from a great article that talks about reading fluency and phrasing says that fluency involves not only the word recognition ability, but also that semantic and syntactic knowledge that we've been talking about all morning. So that includes the punctuation marks that really tell us how to read the text. And this prosody is really important in building reading fluency. This is a definition of prosody by Kuhn and her colleagues. And what we want to think about when we think about oral reading fluency is that learners have opportunities to engage with connected texts. So yes, there's a place for reading word lists, etc., but it's extremely important that reading fluency practice includes reading connected texts. And an article that was written, it's in your reference section, about adolescent struggling readers, since many of you who are here today work with kids who are still struggling, and they're struggling for a variety of reasons, but one might be reading fluency. So we really do want to continue to work with these students on their fluency, but we're going to work on their phrase reading ability, their ability to chunk words into these meaningful word groups, because this ability becomes increasingly more important as the students get older. And why? Because the text they're reading gets increasingly more complex. And this particular study that looked at a number of adolescent struggling readers talked about the fact that this ability to read in phrases is correlated with students' syntactic awareness, and it actually accounts for more of the variance in their reading comprehension than their passage reading rate. Again, going back to my point, it's not how fast you read, it's really how prosodically you read, because it is a signal that students are actually making meaning. So what can we do to support students in this, this syntactic parsing, as I say here? We have to review these common phrasing patterns, the subject, the predicate, the phrases, the clauses that we've been talking about, and then have students practice with the text that you want them to read in their content classes, in their ELA classes. Don't just pick a random text, pick the text that you want them to be comprehending and working on. So this is just an example of that. And this, I mentioned this article by Scott and Balthazar. Again, it's an awesome article. And in it, the authors show this table for comprehension questions for later developing complex sentences. There's a lot on this slide. So for those of you who work with older students, it is important. English teachers, if you're an English teacher, you guys learn about syntax, right? For teaching high school kids, and you know all this terminology, you know a relative clause and an adverbial clause and an object complement clause. It's not so important that you know the exact definition, but just so that you see why these different later developing complex sentence structures are complicated and what to do about it. How can you address these in your older adolescent struggling readers? So as I've got about 20 minutes left or so, 25 minutes. I want to leave time for some Q&A at the end. I definitely want to talk about writing now. So you all are very familiar, at least I think many of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with the writing revolution. And I love the writing revolution. I've known Judy Hockman for years. She trained our mentors a number of years ago in her writing program, and it's amazing. And all these building blocks are not building blocks, sorry, principles are important. The ones that I have highlighted here, or I thought I did anyway, are this idea sentences are the building blocks, that grammar is best taught in context. That's extremely important. So I'm going to reiterate that. And these are some I do, we do, you do strategies that come from the writing revolution. And this is something that I pulled off one of the documents that you shared with me. So if you don't know about it, it is in your references. So when we talk about the who do, we can do these things for writing too. Complete the sentence with a prepositional phrase, add a verb to each prepositional phrase. So you have these sentence frames that we use for oral language. We can use these for written language. We can do something called sort, match, and write. And I'm going to show you an example of it in a second. But again, thinking about these stages or phases that Linnea Airy talks about, the pre-alphabetic, we would have them do this orally, but once they're able to read, we can have them do this activity with decodable text, and then we want them to write the sentences. Same thing with at the consolidated stage. So what would this look like? We have a text here about, you know, this researchers finding these nutrients in icebergs. They explored. The icebergs were floating. The nutrients helped make. There's information about birds eating the krill and the fish. So we can have the students sort the who did what to what and when. So these are the objects, or they could be the adverbial clauses after they broke off a sheet of ice. So you give them the words down below, and then they sort. And then when they're done sorting, they actually write the sentences. And you can have them expand those sentences as well. Do the same thing with this idea of the just statement that I mentioned a few minutes ago. These are the 3 steps for writing a just statement, but they start with that who or what and expanding, and then combining the information to write a just statement. Here we have a passage from ReadWorks about hurricanes. And what we're doing with this particular passage is we're going to have the kids practice writing and putting the ideas together with the who, the do, and then expanding more about where these hurricanes form, etc. And then they can write the sentences about this particular text. They're going to select the vocabulary words that we want them to use in their written work. They're going to start by writing a kernel sentence with the selected verbs, vocabulary. So in this case, they're going to write kernel sentences about hurricanes, maybe using the word storm. And then they're going to expand their kernel sentence with a where and a when phrase. So where did the hurricanes form, right? Where do the hurricanes move? Where do the hurricanes spin? And you all have seen this template from the Writing Revolution. It's a wonderful way to get students to write their summaries. So this is a quote from Hockman and Wexler's book, The Writing Revolution, talking about the fact that summarizing and sentence expansion actually demand the similar skills that I just showed you with, for example, the just statement. And this is a great graphic organizer for having the students practice writing those summary sentences. Another very effective strategy that has been well researched is sentence combining. And Bruce Sadler, if I'm sure many of you know who he is, he's been doing this work for quite some time. He's written lots of books on sentence combining, and it's extremely effective strategy, especially for writers with learning disabilities. And so you can start with something super simple, combining Goldilocks, oh my gosh, like I said, tongue-tied. Goldilocks was hungry. She broke into the bear's home. What fanboy would go here? Goldilocks was hungry, comma, so she broke into the bear's home, right? So just combining 2 simple sentences into a compound sentence. And you start small, you can do a compound subject, you can do a compound predicate. You start out easy, and then you get progressively more challenging. And this is from one of your wonderful PowerPoints that I pulled out. This is the I do, where you're going to have 2 simple sentences. You're going to have students identify the independent clause and generate a compound sentence with a coordinating conjunction. So you have lots of great information in your wonderful resources that point to how you might have students do this work with sentence combining. It really does a great job of kind of getting them to put into practice writing these more complex sentences by using the coordinating or subordinating conjunctions, combining words, etc. So it's really great. And I loved looking at your resources and how you've put those together. You've done a great job. Is another activity where you're combining word level work with sentence level writing. So you might have students list 10 nouns with this particular phonetic pattern that they've been working on, and then have them list 10 action verbs, right? And sort of another idea of a sentence slam, and then have them write 3 or more 2-word sentences with singular subjects, have them practice with plural subjects so that they can do that subject-verb agreement that many of them struggle with. After they do that, have them add adjectives, tell more about the name or the noun, and then write a short paragraph that incorporates some of those words and phrases. And once you can do a single paragraph like that and do this, with a very scaffolded approach, we want the students to be able to write a simple paragraph with a topic sentence, supporting sentences, and concluding sentence. And we teach them in this progression, right, where the teacher provides the topic sentence and the students have to write a couple of supporting sentences. Now you give them the supporting sentences and they have to figure out what the topic sentence is, and then finally figure out how to do a concluding sentence. And this is just an example of the activity done with one of our mentors, showing them a topic sentence about a beloved teacher in this school, and the children brainstormed all the things that Mr. Acero can do. And then what's the wrap up or concluding sentence from that? And then what Wendy did after that is she had them expand this paragraph through her questioning strategies and shifting phrases around. So she moved every day at school. So the when, Mr. A helps students and teachers, showing them how you can move phrases around. All right, and so that's not enough about writing. I know that. There's so much that we need to do with writing, but I hope that you can sort of think about all the things I talked about in the major part of this webinar, where we talked about those activities, the word sorts, the sentence building, neighbor expansion, action expansion, that you actually can take into students' writing. And I think you also have done a really nice job with your PowerPoints and your syntax project with getting students to be writing. So I want to kind of spend the next 15 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes, and make sure I have time for Q&A, talking about the importance of analyzing your text. So we might practice this a little bit. So bring that text back while I talk a little bit about this process. I hope that most of you know of that there was a great study that was done after the National Reading Panel did its great work and the meta-analysis of all the studies that led to the 5 big ideas. 2 years later, there was a great study done that was specifically focused on comprehension. And in that study, called the RAND study, there was a discussion about the role that the reader, the text, the task, and the context play in comprehension. And I keep coming back to this when I work with teachers, because I want you all to think about comprehension. It's such a complex process. one of the things that makes it complex is that there are these variables that contribute to students' success with their comprehension. The three major variables that are listed here are the text, the activity, and the reader. So the reader is, what the reader brings to the table, the reader's skills, their cognitive abilities, how do they feel about reading, are they motivated, have they struggled their whole life? So that's a big variable. Another variable that's important is, what are you going to ask the students to do after they've comprehended or after they've read a particular text? So that matters, right? What you ask them to do, and I say to teachers all the time, before you put a text in front of a student, please tell them what the objective for reading that text is. Is it, I just want you to listen to a great piece of text and, you don't have to do a thing, or we're going to talk about it later, or whatever the task is, the activity, tell them ahead of time, because they're going to read that text differently depending on what you're going to expect them to do with it. But the thing I really want to talk a little bit more about right now is the text itself. What is it that the text contributes to in terms of, or how does the text contribute to a student's ability to comprehend? And I've talked a little bit about that, not a little, a lot today. But before I get into that a little bit more, just this RAND heuristic really is acknowledging the fact that reading comprehension depends on the interaction among these three variables. They're interrelated. There's no such thing as a good reader. If you put a physics text in front of me, I might be able to read the words, but that doesn't mean I'm going to comprehend it. I'm not a good reader when it comes to certain topics, and that's true for most of us. We're variably successful with the different activities. If you ask a student who has weak written expression skills to write about the text that they read, that could be really hard, even though they could orally tell you a whole bunch of stuff about it. That doesn't mean they're going to be able to translate that into writing. So we're going to be variably successful depending on what we're asked to do. And this relationship is going to change over time. So, this is a great book. I don't know if you've ever seen it, A Place to Land. It tells the story of the I Have a Dream and speech and how Martin Luther King wrote it. It's a beautiful text that you could read to young students, but take a look at this one sentence. So if I asked you to tell me what is challenging about this sentence, can you just put a couple ideas into the chat? What makes this text challenging? The number of names, exactly. Lots of namers in this one, and names that may not be familiar to kids. They may not know anything about these children. Anything else that comes to mind? It feels like a run-on sentence. Kind of is, right? Figurative language, exactly. Yes, embedded clauses, vocabulary, pronouns, exactly. So you all get the idea. These sentences that are in children's read-alouds can be very challenging for lots of reasons, right? What's a yellow legal pad? Precisely. So before you would read this text to your kids, you would want to really think about, what would we do? What would I have to do to prepare a student to read it? This is just an example from Framing Your Thoughts, which is a wonderful program that is now actually being distributed by Hagerty. But this is a beautiful piece of literature from Stuart Little. You don't know who this long sentence is about until you get to the end, right? It has all this great descriptive language, but we don't know what it's about until we know Stuart stopped to get a drink of sarsaparilla. Where did he stop? What did it look like? Right? It's beautiful language, but challenging. So what makes text challenging is what we often refer to as text complexity, and there's different ways of looking at that. One is quantitatively, like Lexile's quantitatively level a text by its sentence length and its vocabulary, but there's a qualitative aspect to leveling a text that has to do with the level of meaning, the purpose, the structure, the conventions, the clarity, all of this stuff. So, and Scott and Balthazar used this example of a complex sentence. And I'm not going to ask you to count because it will take too long, but there are actually 5 clauses in this one sentence. So every clause is associated with an idea. So if you, again, take your text for just a moment and pull out a sentence that you think might be a challenging sentence in your text and see if you could identify what makes that sentence challenging. Is it the length of the sentence? Is it the distance between the subject and the verb, that example I showed you from Hatchet? Is it the fact that it has all these embedded modifiers and multiple clauses, right? Is it because it's passive voice? Is it the word order? This is an example from that Scott and Balthazar article. It could have been her tone of voice that her boss reacted to. That's a very odd word order, right? It's unusual, let's put it that way. And are there advanced connectives? So as we wrap up, I just want you to take a quick, just find a sentence, put the sentence, if you will, if somebody would be willing to do this, and put the sentence in the chat that you think would be a challenging sentence. And you go one step further and maybe tell me what, or I could try to guess why you chose it. Which of these difficulties, or what makes that sentence, better way to say it is, what makes that sentence challenging? Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to take a minute and read your sentence. So yeah, that would be a challenging sentence for sure. Patricia, put one in here. Agreed. Another one. Love that one, Christine. Yeah, Jen, it travels through the streams and waterways. What's it? What travels? So I'm going to ask you, as a result of this webinar, to think about looking at the texts that you're going to read to your students or ask your students to read that you've decided might be a good vehicle for supporting their syntactic knowledge, their syntactic awareness. And in order to do that, which sentences might you extract from that text and do an explicit lesson around it? You're not going to do it for every sentence at all. You're going to explicitly teach a process where you're going to pose certain questions, but ultimately that's what you're going to have your kids do. When they get to a sentence they can't figure it out, they're going to be asking those questions about the who, the what, doing what, where, all those questions we've talked about today, because that's how they're going to be able to understand sentences. And not only that, but that's also going to help them write those sentences that have these multiple clauses that we want them to use and these advanced connectives that we want them to use. And again, just to reiterate how important text selection is, we do want you, I do want you to also think about what text to use to do this work, because not all texts are created equal. Some are better than others for doing explicit instruction, explicit syntax instruction. And this particular article was in the Reading Teacher just a couple months ago. It's really excellent, talking about complexity of text and how important it is that we're thinking carefully about the text we're choosing. And as we're wrapping up, I did want to spend a few minutes talking about assessment, because we have great assessments for phonemic awareness. Super easy to figure out very quickly if our kids have phonemic awareness or not, right? 5 minutes. You want to go into detail, the CTOP is going to take longer than 5 minutes, but that gives you a lot more specificity about the nature of the trouble. Phonics, very easy to do a core phonics survey. Spelling surveys are fairly easy, take time to analyze, but they're pretty easy to administer for sure. And they elicit really good information that can drive instruction. But when it comes to vocab, morphology, we have some assessments, comprehension, syntax, we don't have the same kinds of assessments that are available for those constrained skills, because some of these comprehension related skills are less constrained. We do have some standardized subtests. For sentence comprehension, we have a subtest from the CASTLE that speech and language pathologists might use. We have listening comprehension subtests from the Woodcock-Johnson and other reading achievement tests. Some of them do have a listening comprehension subtest, and it's really important that we measure that. If we see our kids struggling with reading comp, we need to measure listening comp, because we have to know, is the listening comprehension the driver? Sentence recall is a great way to assess syntactic awareness. The SELF, another speech and language assessment, has a subtest for sentence recall, and then the test of written language has a subtest for sentence combining that I actually like a lot too. So we do have some standardized subtests, but most teachers are not going to administer those standardized subtests. Those are left to the specialists. So what do you do in lieu of that? Well, an oral language assessment where you just ask a student to repeat a sentence is actually really interesting to tell you if they have syntactic awareness. He asked his mother if he could keep the cat, and the student might say he asked his mother, can he keep the cat? So it's not that the student had trouble remembering the sentence, it's that this student doesn't have syntactic awareness of that particular construction, if he could keep. So instead, he translated it, mother, can he keep the cat? This is actually from the oral language acquisition inventory, which is not widely known about or used, but again, it's a sentence repetition task. And you can see in this example, the student forgot or left out the apostrophe S, the possessive in the first sentence, and omitted part of the verb, or actually the linking verb was. He omitted the fanboys, so, but, and, so, and again, that was because not because of his memory probably, but rather because of his syntactic awareness of those cohesive ties. There is another assessment that is relatively new, the CFAL. It's a diagnostic assessment that's published by Acadians, and it does measure syntactic knowledge. So you could take a look at that. But in the absence of the formal assessments I just mentioned, teachers are encouraged to observe their students' use of verb tense and subject-verb agreement. You know, if you're listening to your students and there's a lot of language happening in your classroom, oral language happening, you're going to know the kids who have trouble with that, and you're going to explicitly teach that. You're going to informally pay attention to your students' grammatical knowledge. Now that we've unpacked all those grammatical building blocks, are they using those building blocks in their oral language and their written language? Do they understand and can they find the subject, the predicate, the direct and indirect object Do they know about clauses and phrases? And are they able to construct simple, compound, and complex sentences in their oral work as well as their written work? Again, this is something that you can probably glean from your instruction. So just to summarize what we talked about this morning, syntactic awareness contributes to text comprehension, which is why Cheryl Scott says sometimes it's the sentence that's tripping the kids up in reading comp. We can't just go right to the discourse level. We have to figure out, are students struggling with syntax? Not all students need explicit teaching of syntax, right? But the students that generally need it are the students with language-based learning difficulties, the students that have language comprehension difficulties, are multilingual learners, and they really do need and benefit from this explicit teaching that we've talked about. We're going to teach the function of words and sentences. We're not going to have them rotely memorize the definitions, and we're not going to have them circle subjects and underlying predicates and so forth. We're going to have them use the sentences and orally produce and write and comprehend them in a more functional based way. Because syntax does play an important role in the ability to read fluently, it's a very important part of reading fluency, comprehending text and writing a variety of sentences. And last but not least, I hope that I've incentivized you and encouraged you to look at your text analytically for the possible sentence level difficulties that might arise when you're teaching those texts and those sentences. As I mentioned, I have a lot of references here, more here, and a few resources. There's so much out there, and you all have some great resources. So I'm encouraged that you're well on your way to continuing your syntax journey. I hope you thought of this as somewhat of a party. It was a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of new learning for some of you. I would, before we ask questions, because it's 11:52, I think I have time to do that poll. If you wouldn't mind, just so I can see it, did your syntactic awareness grow? Do you feel more confident with teaching this content? So if you wouldn't mind answering these questions, and then I'll take any questions that anyone might have before noon. So I'm not sure. It looks like I have more people who feel that they're somewhat knowledgeable, but we'll have to look at the comparison when this is done. And I do hope that that you do feel you're somewhat more prepared. I think I do feel like I see more people saying they're somewhat more prepared. But again, I didn't write down the numbers, so we'll have to see how that fleshes out. So thank you for taking the time. It does look like I'm all set. I have more of you. That's awesome. So keep answering the poll. And while you're answering the poll, maybe anybody who has a question that I could answer, I'm happy to do that now.
We do have some great questions in the Q&A. One actually was, again, another fluency question, just some clarifications.
Sure.
On your do's and don'ts slides of instructional practice, you referenced words per minute. And this participant just wants to clarify that there is research supporting words correct per minute, but that perhaps we shouldn't be emphasizing rate over accuracy. Was that the messaging you were?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I don't want to suggest that we shouldn't look at those norms. We absolutely should. They're very important. And as I said, reading fluency is a proxy for reading comp because it correlates so highly with reading comprehension. But I'm really speaking about the students who can't read quickly because of the processing speed limitations, and they get flustered. When you turn on the stopwatch, they freeze, and you don't get their best shot at performing that task. So, but yes, there's absolute validity for that reading fluency. And there's an interesting study that was conducted not long ago about the correlation between the percentiles and students' performance on the NAEP. So I don't want to minimize that at all.
And then I know, Alicia, I know you've got to wrap up, but I have to squeeze in one more question. I'm sorry. There's a really interesting question about text structures, thinking about cause and effect and problem and solution. Should students be aware in analyzing text structures, recognizing that some of those keywords and some of those connectives are really related to the structure of the text they're reading?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking that question, because I thought of that this morning. I said, oh my goodness, I should put that in there. Because we do, and I mentioned earlier, we do teach text structure. Text structure is one of the 5 big ideas for teaching comprehension, because the text structure is the way that when we read, we organize that at that macro level. That's how we recall what we read, by organizing it according to the particular structure. But we do that at a macro level, right? But we also do it at a micro level, in the sense that there are certain, like you said, cohesive ties, signal words, certain literate language structures or sentence structures that are more, that are associated with the different text structures. So yeah, the two actually get woven together, most definitely. Thank you for asking that question.
Perfect. Okay, Alicia, I think we can pass it over to you to wrap up. Lots of thank yous and lots of appreciations in the chat, Margie.
Great. I'm glad. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you very much for that workshop, Margie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Today's workshop again was put on by ONlit, which is a project from the Ministry of Education. And we would love to have everyone's feedback. We do have a survey that we will put the text in the chat. You'll also be redirected to the survey at the end of this webinar, and we would really appreciate it if everyone could fill that out. We also, we have winners when we do surveys. So we did the survey in the fall and then the survey in the winter. And the winner of the survey is randomly chosen, and they will receive a lovely Lending Library starter pack for their staff room. And I wanted to congratulate Anna and Crestview Public School in the TDSB, who are the winners of our winter survey. So thank you for that. And if you enter today's survey, you'll get entered into our spring survey draw. I also want to congratulate the winners from today's syntax party. Again, we randomly selected the winners. If you see your name here on the screen, this would be your screen name that you were signed into Zoom. Please email us at info@onlit.org within the next 2 days and give us your mailing address, and we will send you a copy of this lovely book, Margie's book, Syntax, Knowledge to Practice. So Jessica Frost, Nikki D, St. Thomas Aquinas, the whole school, I guess you're going to have to share a copy, Wendy Visser, and Brenda Tomnick. So congratulations to you. We also asked you at the beginning of the workshop to share with us your progress today using the hashtag Syntax Party, and we were absolutely thrilled to see the pictures rolling in of everyone in their staff rooms enjoying today's workshop. So thank you very much for sharing those. And the winner of the social share is Mick K. Teach. So congratulations, you have won a copy of IDA Ontario's Basics of Decoding and Spelling Instruction. And again, please email us at info@onlit.org, and we will get you sorted out with your prize. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. We had quite a few questions in the chat about the resources that were shared today by Margie. We will be going through the chat and the presentation and putting all of those into a document and then sending that out in a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this session. And if you have any additional questions about this, again, you can always contact our team. We are here and ready to answer your questions at onlit.org. So thank you very much. And with that, I will stop my share.
Thank you all. And if the person that asked the question about the assessments is still on, I don't believe any of those assessments are in the public domain. I know the CFAL is a published test by Acadians, but the sentence repetition task is something you could probably find, and you could probably develop something informally. And I think it's worth the time doing that, especially for kids that you might suspect have difficulties with syntactic awareness.
Just to jump off of that, I know it's 11:59. We have one last minute. I did pop it in the chat, but the new book by Deb Glazer and Susan Smart, the new edition of Next Steps, in the appendices, they have a checklist that is based around the CFL. I think they were able to get the licensing from Acadian. So it's not an assessment in that it doesn't have that same materials, but there's a nice checklist. And just if there are any Ontario-based teachers on this call, you have free access to Next Steps through the Ontario College of Teachers Members Library. So that could be an interesting thing to look at.
Oh, thank you for telling us that, Una. That's great. Appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I hope everyone enjoyed the syntax party and enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope everyone has a clear and wonderful view of the eclipse.
Yay.